Operación, ¿nos indican cuando entremos, por favor, por redes sociales?
Listo en ambas redes.
Muy bien. ¿Qué tal? Buen día o buena tarde, depende de donde.
Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are joining us from in the world. Thank you for listening. My name is Daniela Mendoza. I am part of the National Network of Female Journalists, and it is my pleasure to moderate this final activity of the day, this final panel within this international forum titled Pending and Urgent Actions for the Future on the 25th anniversary of Chapter J of the Beijing Platform for Action. Our panel today is really, truly interesting. And this is a second chance that we have today to talk with female journalists at the head of feminist outlets and outlets that have this gender perspective. And we will be hearing about their main challenges, their work, the conditions that they develop in, and their best practices, advice, and experiences that they are here to share with this audience on our live streams. I would like to start with a brief introduction of our panelists, and I will remind you that towards the end of this panel, we will have some time for Q&A. Our audience, anyone who is directly on Zoom, will be able to send us your questions over the chat group, the chat function, and those of you watching on YouTube and Facebook, you may also ask your questions through the corresponding media and platforms, and our organization team will send us your questions and comments so that we can also have a chance to add them to our dialogue and take advantage of this time. So let's begin with a very brief introduction. There's really not much that can be said about them. They already stand out from their achievements. So let's begin. We have Lola Palenzuela, one of the founders of the feminist magazine La Poderío from Andaluz. She's also a member of the International Female Journalists Network with Gender Vision and a communicator from Granada, Spain. We have Mónica Maureria. She is responsible for communications in the direction of gender, diversity, and equity from the University of Santiago in Chile. She has a long trajectory in the design of political and communication strategies for national and international organizations. She teaches journalism in the Diego Portales University, member of the Gender and Equality Observatory, and an editor of Women in Media and part of the Network of Female Journalists and Communicators. Then we have Hazel Zamora, producer in Violeta Radio, a radio station here in Mexico, which is a community feminist radio project broadcasting in the Mexico City area, and she's also a journalist from CIMAC Noticias. We have Jessica Moreira, co-founder and one of the directors of Nosotras, Yersta Perifeira. She is also a correspondent from the journalism agency Mural, and co-author of the blog Mortes en Tabú from Sao Paulo. She has worked in organizations to promote the right to education, Institute Alana, and the Popular Center of Media. She's a co-author of books such as Heroines from This History, Women Looking for Justice for Family Members Murdered by the Dictatorship, and Queijadas. And finally, we have Lani Cáceres, director of the Diario Digital Femenino, a virtual outlet exclusive for compiling and producing information relating to gender. She's also co-founder of the platform La ESI. There are our members of this panel. Thank you all very much for your time today. And let's begin with one of these questions that I've already touched upon. So I would like to start with Lola. From your experience in your media outlets, what do you believe has been the main contributions to journalism in general? First of all, thank you very much for giving La Poderío a seat at this table that is so important. And this also gives us the possibility to get in touch with our colleagues and to discuss these topics. Now, from our outlet, we can say that we were born out of the need to give a voice to women and to our autonomous state. The Spanish state is divided in several autonomous communities, with Andalusia having the largest population with 8 million inhabitants, and we are, let's say, next door to Portugal. So the thing about major media outlets, only speaking about something negative and the negative issues that come out of our community is not exactly great. Now, this community and the feminist outlet also points out that in major mainstream media, women are never women. They are actually invisible. It's a complete invisibility of women. We were born out of the need to give a voice to that part of Andalusia, to all these women who are not seen, and where women are politicians, scientists, and in charge of law enforcement. We are the ones compiling information. It is my mother, your mother, our grandmothers. We need to take into account that we have such a historical and cultural tradition that we need to acknowledge. The people of this land have the Andalus. This is where cultures such as the Jewish culture, Muslim and Christian traditions came together. We had the light that gave birth to all of European culture. So Andalusia, I don't have an Andalusian accent. My parents were forced to migrate. I was actually born in Madrid, grew up in Barcelona. I studied in Bilbao, but my origins, my people come from Andalusia. We have a lack of culture from the Andalusian people. So where is it? Where is their culture? It is in their women, the women who convey all that knowledge. So we put on our traditional dress and said, let's create an outlet. So we created it. And then also in Spain, we have our colleagues, our mother, which is La Pícara magazine. They've been working for 11 years with tremendous thrive. And what we do is create a written history to outlast, because women are not visible and we are in charge of telling the story. We want our daughters and our sons to read a history that has the face of a woman. That is fantastic. And what an important job of compiling the history of not those who stand out, but giving a voice to the unseen. And I think many of the feminist media outlets or those with a gender perspective come on because they don't find a space or a voice themselves in other outlets. So there comes a moment when you all just decide to open up your own space, and that's a common denominator we will see. I would like next to welcome Monica. So Monica, from your experience, what contributions do you think you have made to journalism? Thank you, Daniela. Thank you so much, Lola, for that opening argument to today's debate. And rather than rescuing the experience of a particular outlet, I think we have to talk about the experience of feminist journalists. As Lola said, they are from marginal spaces. They're not all in feminist or progressive outlets. Many of them are still working and disputing and fighting to represent women properly from the mainstream media, from patriarchal media, and also enduring. And by enduring, I don't mean it negatively, but I mean it as fostering certain transforming structural changes for all of society with a perspective of a democratic aperture. So I want to mention this journalistic, let's say, recovery that female journalists are doing from our online platforms, like the ones we're seeing come out today. And there is a journalistic work from the female perspective, from a feminist perspective as well, that gives more weight to information, to the reproduction of content, even from a perspective of human rights, of gender, of feminism. So I think what that does is fight for these representations from the margins. Um, and I think what Lola said is also valid. We have to show the diversity of women. We're not homogenous. We're not all standard. There are so many representations with a multiplicity of identity. So I think that the emphasis that has been placed by the pandemic, which of course we will continue to discuss, is precisely to show this diversity and plurality of women with all our different intersections, and of course with all the discrimination that falls on them. Excellent. Thank you so much, Monica. I think that you have brought up a very important point to this debate, which is that many of us who have worked in the traditional media are also trying to open the door. Many are still there and they are facing an incredible task ahead of them, and any progress is very significant. So next, Jessica Moreira. Sorry, I was jumping ahead a little bit. So Jessica, I wanted to add something else, of course, since we're already discussing the topic of the mainstream media. What do you think is a particular contribution of feminist journalism from your outlet, but also how do you think that has impacted traditional media, if any? Right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. From Brazil, I can say good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to join you, my Latin American sisters and from all around the world at this very difficult time in Brazil, where we have reached 300,000 deaths due to COVID and a genocide government. So it's so important to connect with other female journalists. We know that this health crisis experienced by the world is also a crisis of information and freedom of speech. So for women of the periphery, was born out of the need to talk of our stories that were not present in mass media, in the mainstream media. In Brazil, the periphery, let's say, are the outlying areas from the regional centers, urban centers, and these are also the parts where the population has fewer access to education, information, and social welfare services. It's also important to mention that these are spaces with a lot of creativity, with a huge amount of struggle, specifically from women of Black origins. In Brazil, the Black population is 56% of the total population. However, we women do not hold any positions of power or leadership. We noticed this in 2014, and also as a part of the major mainstream media, we had no representation. We were nowhere to be seen. There was no presence of Black female journalists from the periphery either. So we realized it was of the utmost importance to create our own outlet. So from 2019, we opened up a space with a study that analyzed all the major mainstream media, and the results showed that the three major outlets had 64% of men, 28% of women, but white women only. Black men were only 2%, Black women 2%. So we understood, thanks to this, that we needed to create our own website. So created Women of the Periphery to tell our story. Our story, of course, was not told by the traditional mass media. Our stories were always stereotyped. It was a description of our world that was very simplistic. So we've been working on this for a couple of years, and by now we have over 1,000 stories from women, and we write our stories not only from our newsroom, but we've actually ventured out to their regions, to their areas to interview women. Sometimes the hashtag and internet does not reach these areas. We go and talk to them directly. We talk about stereotypes of women in the media. And then we created this whole vision with photos and videos of women to further discuss their experience. Afterwards, we made a documentary which was broadcasted to a lot of places and through a lot of women's organizations. Since then, we've been telling the stories of women, and we understood that our type of journalism is based on memory. It's anti-patriarchy, anti-racism, led by women. Our team is only made up of women, and we only interview women. So it's highly feminist. We also tell the story of Black women from the periphery, and our commitment is to provide a different outlook of Brazil. It's an entirely different world. We understand that we are in the periphery, in certain regions that are highly vulnerable, but we have a way to look at the world of the world and to act and to think that needs to analyze everything differently. So unfortunately, we're experiencing a very sad time when it comes to our health system and everything related to healthcare. So we talked to women about the healthcare system in Brazil, which is universal and free, but we need to understand how women in the periphery helped create the public policies of our country, the policies for education, for healthcare. The women in the periphery have been a lot more vulnerable, specifically now with the pandemic. And they were before, they were always vulnerable, but they're stronger than ever. Their struggle is stronger than ever. And our journalism always tells the stories of women. So, Daniela, we noticed that as women of the periphery, we were not spoken of in any of the mainstream media. Maybe we saw some TV shows that only portrayed us as stereotypes. There were even some journalists that fostered these stereotypes without any shame. So we know that these journalists from the mainstream media are using us only as sources, but we're not only sources, we're journalists ourselves. All the journalists, female journalists in the mainstream media are from the middle class. They're wealthier. They don't take us into account. They don't look our way even. But since the pandemic started, they're constantly calling us like, please share with us a source. Please help me find a woman who is experiencing and living through this. Please help us. But there was a colleague that said, that we are talking to our neighbors, to our mothers, to our grandmothers, to our sisters, to our friends. These are people that we find every day, that we see every day. So as opposed to the mainstream media, we're very close to the people and we're watching everything all the time. So our journalism is memory based. This is journalism to register this moment, which is so complicated, but that still needs to be registered with our vision and our mindset of the world. I think this
That is a very comprehensive look. Yeah, we're going to cover some of the topics that you just discussed, Jessica. And now I'd like to pass the floor to Heiser Zamora so that she can tell us a little bit about the contributions that they've done from their work and their media. And if she thinks, if you could tell us, if you can, like all these things that you're doing, is this having an impact as well in the larger media outlets?
Hola, ¿qué tal, Daniela? Y a todas las compañeras que nos
Daniela.
acompañan, a
Hi,
las panelistas
everyone that's
que vamos
following
poquito,
us.
pero ha
Thanks
sido
to
un
all
gusto
panel
escucharlas.
speakers, but it's been great to
También
listen
todo el
to
foro ha
all
sido
of
muy
you.
interesante,
And
las
this conference has
reflexiones
been
y
really
bueno,
very
CIMAC siempre
important, all
realizando
the
un
work you're
trabajo
doing, and
increíble también
CIMAC
a mis
doing
compañeras.
this amazing
Felicidades.
work all the time.
Pues les quiero primero
Congratulations for
contar
this.
un poco
So
de
first of all, I
Violeta
want to
Radio
tell you a little
rápidamente
bit
para
about
quienes no
Violeta
conocen el
Radio. So
medio.
for the ones that are not
Se trata
familiar
de
with
la
Violeta
primera
Radio, this
radio
is the
comunitaria en
first
la Ciudad de
community radio
México
that we have
y
in
la
Mexico
primera radio
City,
feminista.
and the first feminist radio as well.
Para mí es un gusto estar ahí. Yo me
It's a
encargo
great
de la
honor for me to be
producción de los
here. I'm in
contenidos,
charge of the
de
production of
algunos contenidos de
content,
esta
of some
radio
of the
en la barra
contents that we have
matutina.
at this radio
Y
for
bueno,
the
la
morning
concesión a Violeta Radio fue
shift.
entregada en
And well,
2017 a
this
una alianza de organizaciones que justo han trabajado a lo
concession
largo de
was
años para
granted in
colocar el periodismo
2017,
feminista
so
y
that
que son un referente para
by the
muchas de
government to
nosotras,
the
¿no?
radio, and
Esta
we are
alianza
placing feminist
es la
content. So
Alianza
this
por el Derecho
partnership
Humano
is
de
a
las
partnership
Mujeres
for
a
the human
Comunicar
right of
AC,
women
que la
to
conforman dos
communicate, AC,
organizaciones civiles.
and it's
Una
created
de
by
ellas es
two civil
Comunicación e
society
Información de la
organizations.
Mujer
One
y
of
la
them
otra
is
es Salud
Information
Integral
and
para las
Society of
Mujeres,
Women, and
PAM,
the other is
y además también
Comprehensive
está integrada
Health for
la
Women.
investigadora
And
de la
it
UNAM,
also includes
Jaime
the
Montiel,
researcher
quienes son
from
quienes
the
conforman esta alianza y plantean
university,
este proyecto
AIME,
que
and well,
finalmente
they're the ones that brought
se
this
entrega e
partnership
inicia
together
en
that
2018.
started in
Es un
2018.
medio pues muy
So
reciente,
it's
de
a very
reciente
new
creación,
media.
pero
It
es
was
resultado al
recently
final del día
created, but
del
it's a
trabajo que han
result
realizado
of the
estas
work that
organizaciones,
these
CIMAC por
organizations
más de
have
30
done
años y
with
PAM
CIMAC
también
for more than
desde
30
el trabajo y
years,
el impulso
from
que
the
le ha dado
work and the
también a toda
support
esta radio
that comes
y bueno,
from
la
all these,
investigadora
for all this
Aide
radio,
Vega.
and also with
Entonces,
the researcher Aide Vega.
un poco el panorama que
So that's a
enfrentamos en
little
la
bit
Ciudad de México,
a
de
little bit
acuerdo
of what
con
we
un
see here in
observatorio que
Mexico
hace
City,
CIMAC de
according
Medios,
to
es que
an
cada 100 horas que se
observatory, is
transmiten
that
de
of
radio
every
en la
100
Ciudad de
hours
México,
in
solo
radio in
20
Mexico
horas
City, just 20
se
hours
escucha a una voz de una mujer.
are
Es decir, la
female
diferencia ahí
women. So
está,
the
es
difference is
clara,
there,
y
it's
por eso es
clear.
necesario este
So that's
tipo de
why
medios,
it's
y por eso
necessary
es
to have this
necesario
media.
una
And
radio
that's why
feminista
we
en la
need a
Ciudad de
feminist
México.
radio in
Parte de
Mexico.
nuestro trabajo,
So
pues
part
es
of
eso,
our
ha sido
work is
colocar
that. I
una
mean,
oferta
it's been to
informativa en la
bring
radio en la
an
Ciudad de
offer of
México
information in
que,
Mexico City
que
that
visibilice, que muestre esas
brings light
realidades
and that
diferentes que
shows these
atraviesan
different
las
realities
mujeres y las niñas en
that
México, ¿no? Y
women
que siguen
and
quedando
girls
fuera
have
del
in
foco
Mexico.
mediático.
And they're
Tú
still out of
escuchas
the
Violeta Radio,
media.
es una
If you
oferta
listen to Violeta
completamente
Radio,
distinta
it's a different
a la que
offer
puedes
that's
escuchar en la
completely
Ciudad de
different to
México,
what
que
you
son
can
medios
listen to in
comerciales,
Mexico City.
desde
That's
la música, desde las mujeres,
music
desde los
and
temas que hablamos.
women, the
Creo
topics that
que
they
es
cover.
transversal el
So I think that
feminismo
this is
dentro de
cross-cutting,
este medio de
that
comunicación
feminism
que se
is
reconoce
cross-cutting
como
in this
tal, una
media,
radio
that we see it as
feminista.
that. It's a feminist
Eh,
radio.
Un poco Mónica también hablaba
Monica was
de las
also speaking
periodistas, ¿no? que
about
no están en
journalists,
los medios
that
feministas, pero
women
que desde sus
journalists are not
trincheras,
in
desde sus
feminist media, but
espacios,
from their own
están también,
spaces, they
están
are
también haciendo este
also
trabajo.
doing
Parte
this
del
job.
trabajo que hemos
And part
intentado
of the
realizar
work that
es
we're trying
incorporar
to
a más
do
mujeres
is to include
periodistas desde la
more
Red
women
Nacional de
journalists
Periodistas
from this
hasta otras en muchos
national
estados con
network of
quienes hemos
journalists from
tenido
other states
alianzas
as
y hemos
well,
ido
that we've had some
conociendo a
partnerships
Violeta
and we've
Radio.
been
Que
and people
tengan
that
este espacio,
are
que
knowing
también
more
sea su
about Violeta
espacio,
Radio.
que
So
puedan
they're
analizar
open to this
desde
space
acá
so
el
that they can
periodismo
also have this
feminista,
space so that
pero
they can
también que
work
se
from the
puedan
feminist
formar,
space, but that they can
especializar. O sea,
also
también tenemos
get
esta
educated,
parte
that they
que es
can specialize.
necesaria,
We also
que
have this,
muchas
it's
de
necessary
nosotras,
that
por ejemplo, nos hemos formado en
many of us
estos
have
medios, ¿no? Yo me
been
formé
educated
en
or
CIMAC.
trained in this
Entonces
media.
también es
I have my
necesario abrir
education in TIMAC.
espacios
So
para
we also have
estas
to open
otras
spaces
mujeres que
to
no
all these other
necesariamente están
women
en un
that
medio
are
y
not
que no se les
necessarily in the
permite a
media,
veces
and that they
realizar
sometimes are
tan
not allowed
abiertamente este trabajo,
to
¿no?
do this job.
Y otra también, quizá condición que podemos hablar más adelante, pues
well, we can
también hemos buscado
also
las maneras en las que
talk
su
about the
trabajo
different
pueda ser
ways
remunerado,
in
¿no?
which their
Seguimos
job can
buscando
be
que
paid.
también
We're
ellas
also looking
tengan
for
trabajo remunerado frente a
them
la
to have a
precariedad que
paid
existe en los
job,
medios de
and well,
comunicación.
there's a
Y
very
otra
serious
experiencia
problem
que me
of
parece
lack of
importante
resources
hablar
for
del
them.
trabajo que
Also,
hemos
it's important to
realizado en
talk
Violeta
about the
Radio,
job
pues
we've done
es
at
también
Violeta
estas
Radio,
alianzas con
and it has to do with these
organizaciones de la
partnerships with
sociedad civil
organizations
a
of
las
civil
cuales les
society
hemos pedido y hemos
that,
abierto el espacio
well, we've
para que
opened the
ellas puedan
space to
también
them so that they
tener
can also
programas,
have
cápsulas,
programs, entertainment,
transmitir
so
información
that they
del
can also
trabajo
broadcast
que han
information
realizado, ¿no?
of the
Organizaciones
work they've done
feministas
in
desde mujeres
feminist
indígenas
organizations, indigenous
dedicadas a derechos sexuales y
women,
reproductivos, especializadas
also
en
to have access
violencia.
to rights. I am sorry here, colleagues. Could you help us turn the interpretation mode off?
Sí,
Please. I'm sorry,
está
I'm
apagado.
interrupting here. It is off. It's
Y
off.
bueno, retomo.
Well,
Ese ha sido también
so that has
parte de
also
nuestro
been part
trabajo.
of our work.
Abrir espacios a otras
To open
organizaciones que
space
por
to other
muchos años han trabajado y
organizations that
son
have worked for a
especialistas en
long
el
time
tema
and that they
y que creemos
specialize
que
on these
son
topics,
necesarias
and that
escuchar
we
sus
think
voces.
that's necessary to
Y
listen to their
nada más
voices.
rápidamente,
And well, real quick
Daniela, para
again,
que podamos seguir, cómo hemos impactado, ¿no?
so
En los
what's been
medios de
the
comunicación
impact
masiva.
on
Creo que
the
una
on the
parte importante ha
media?
sido
An
las
important
alianzas con
factor has
estos
been the
medios de
partnerships that
comunicación
we've had
masivos
with these
que retomen
massive
nuestros
media, so
contenidos,
that they use our
que
content,
empiecen a
so
mirar
that they start looking
que no ven, ¿no? Que
at
coloquen dentro de sus
or to
fuentes a
bring in their
mujeres, que
sources
estemos ahí
women
las
as
mujeres
well, that women
expertas
are out
en
there,
todos
that
los
expert
temas,
women in
pero
different
creo que
topics
también se
are
han visto
included,
obligados a
but they've also
mirarnos,
been
¿no?
forced
Sin
to
duda
take a
cada
look at
vez
us. Now,
las movilizaciones de las mujeres,
the
las
movement of
concentraciones de las
women,
mujeres
all
en
the
las calles,
massive
es imposible
protest of
no
women in the
mirarlas y no
street. It's
voltear a
impossible not
verlas
to
y
look
hablar de
at
ello.
them and to talk about
Entonces,
that. So,
creo que ahí también nuestro
yes, I do
trabajo es muy
think that
importante.
our
¿Qué
work is very
perspectivas
important there,
abonamos?
which are the
¿Cómo
perspectives
nos
that we're bringing to the
reconfiguramos
table,
frente a
how
medios
we're
de comunicación que
reconfiguring
también ya
ourselves in
empiezan a
the mass
abordar
media
los
that's
temas en su
also
agenda? ¿Y
covering all
cómo
these topics
seguimos
in the agenda, how
empujando
we
para que
also
los
keep
sigan
pushing so that
teniendo dentro de sus agendas?
we still have them in our agendas? Great. Great. Thanks very much for your comments, Hazel. And now let's pass the floor to Lenny Caceres so that she can speak a little bit about the contributions in your media and if you think that this has had an impact on the content of other massive media. So the floor is yours, Lenny. Hi, everyone. It is a great honor to share this space with you. Thanks, CIMAC, very much, and the Red Internacional de Periodistas, that I'm also part of it, and also part of the one in Argentina, with Alia Benaria in Susi Canal, that are in charge of coordinating this, and the international network, Miriam Bobadilla, that's also in charge of it. So we've been rowing this boat of feminism. And well, we've been here for 9 years, and May, it's 9 years. And it's also important to be, to locate ourselves geographically. We're located in La Pampa, that's a province in Argentina that has 400,000 compared to all the population in Argentina as a whole. And it is not easy to work in feminist journalism in all these provinces. Journalism is not easy. Being a woman is not easy when you live in the outskirts. And when we came up with this idea, it crossed by my mind. That was around 2010. And I had it created for 4 years on April the 28th and 2012. Then we had it online by May. So I've been in academia before that. And then I was somehow known as a referent for that. And they called us to talk about this, to speak about science, to talk about teenagers. It even seemed to be dangerous that they would be in the media and would find whatever. I remember a thesis between sexual abuse in childhood, and then she brought all this theory, Rita Gardner. So I was desperate, to delete all this information, and that's how I created that first, this digital diary And it was a space for me to find information that was real, healthy, feminist specific, and that it had voices, voices of our colleagues, female colleagues that are usually not as source. So that's how we contributed to local media. Because, well, at first, no, we had criticism, why it was feminist and not feminine. And my goal was not to be in a small circle or in a micro space where the ones that are familiar with it or that were sensitized, but that we could invite other women, younger women and teenagers, so that they would read our pages.
Abuso sexual infantil, por qué no se dice abuelas y abuelos. Bueno, al respecto, yo armé una guía cortita que después se las comparto en el chat para ver cómo decir, por qué no decimos denigrar, por qué no decimos trabajo en negro o en blanco si no registrado.
So we have to look at all the different way we use the terms, why we have to use black or white, why is our journalism intersectional. So at the start, all these matters were disqualified, like it's been a part of our history. I think even from a young age, I was a feminist, and I studied journalism. I wanted to be a journalist, so those two paths just came together. I don't know. It was probably the result of a different situation. So we had to look at the way we use language. Our outlet is usually sought after for consultations from the local outlets. And whenever we see a headline that is not all right, then we email the outlet and tell them, you cannot say this, or, we will make a comment online. Like it's good writing, but you shouldn't use these terms. Now, we usually don't publish femicides, stories about femicide, um, but we talk about public policies. We do not talk about child sexual abuse. We talk about policies. We don't talk about specific cases. We talk about things from a more general sense. So, as female outlet, we had to take the leap because we were the only ones in Latin America with a daily publication. So now this is not a publication. It is not a weekly newsletter. We have daily updates and we have a massive free bibliography. It is the only one in Latin America with these features, and we didn't really know if it would work, but we're still here. Thank you, Lenny. And how important this job is, and this birth out of the need to have properly supported information. It is fantastic for me to see that there are other journalists, even users, and that the general public has these new spaces for reflection, but also for interaction and for acquiring knowledge, and all these repositories of information with true facts. Infodemia is permeating terribly. So there's a lot of information online that can be confusing. So after this very first round, we have now a general outlook to the struggle and the context of each of our panelists. And we can tell as well that the public can see this fantastic diversity. And it also helps us think about how to learn from all your experiences. So let's move on to our second round by bringing together a couple of questions to continue our dialogue. So my next question is, do you think that your own work has had an impact on other outlets? And let me add, do you think there has been any progress towards acknowledging journalism with gender perspective and feminist journalism? So Lola, the floor is yours. Right. The journalistic work that we carry out at La Poderío started in 2017 as a network of Andalusian journalists, and a year later we went online, but I think that it has been very surprising to us. We have been very well welcomed. Now we have La Corrala, which is a space where other women can write and contribute with things they consider necessary. We have alliances as well. So in terms of progress in recognizing feminist journalism, I think what we see from private media, community media, even the mainstream media, have all been touched by feminism. In Spain, we have had the equality law since 2017. We've had the royal decrees. We have made progress. Still, one thing is regulation and the existing legislation, and another thing is the implementation and its enforcement. In Spain, we continue fighting against the glass ceiling. We have uh, professional and work instability. We're fighting for equal wages. And of course, it affects journalism. But we need to take into account at a general uh, level of the feminist movement is that this has had results. In general, women need education, information, and that just adds on to the struggle. In 2018 in Spain, we had the 8th March with the general demonstration, the general strike of women, and everyone asked what's the point of this, but it was fantastic. We had all our women out in the streets, including ourselves, journalists and communicators, with our own movement, and we were called Journalists for Your Voice. This was organized over a week online and just through Instagram, WhatsApp, and this was our manifesto. We included over 8,000 female journalists and communicators in our manifesto. So I think at a general level, generally speaking, our profession has never really gotten together. We've never formed a group. So with this feminist movement, we brought everyone together. Now, we have all these variations of harassment that we experience. All of that was in our manifesto. We saw this with the 8,000 women journalists and communicators in our country who signed it. The most well-known faces with radio programs and television programs, the ones that are out there, the most famous faces, to the smallest town reporter. They added on to this manifesto. This is important because right now, at this point in time, even after 2018, where we saw the generation of this movement that had been brewing since 1992 with the Association of Feminists and Women Journalists in Catalonia. After all these years, it was until 2018 where we saw new associations in autonomous communities. We have the Copres, who was originated in 95, the year of the Beijing platform. And 2 years before that, we had one of the first organizations as well. But now there are so many in the smallest towns and villages of female journalists. That means WhatsApp and Telegram groups. That means even a headline or a complaint like, hey, male colleague, do you read what you wrote there? So it is also supporting the feminist movement because we're all women. One of them is a doctor, the other one is a hat maker, the other one is a home chef. We're all women at the end of the day. We're all part of this world. Female journalists play a very important role. And I am very proud that from 2018 and even from before, this just became so evident. But whenever there was a woman murdered, it made the headlines in Spain. But pay attention to how it is discussed. And that is what Lenny said as well. We need to have training in the media. We need that for both male and female colleagues, for everybody across the board. And I think that the work of feminism and feminist organizations in information it reminds us that information is an essential right of the general public, and we are the tools that bring them that necessary information. And feminist journalism is a rigorous type of journalism with quality and pluralism. So that is the significance of feminist journalism. Thank you so much, Lola. I think that for everybody, all of us here have seen this flourishing, sprouting from certain movements, and we've seen how the dynamics were already there, and we just needed that final spark to set it all off. And then you see how there are new outlets everywhere, new groups, new interactions, and we do need to realize that there is an impact, and it had permeated, even though it wasn't visible yet, but it came out in the open with that spark. So to learn about your experience, Monica, what do you think? Is there such an acknowledgement of feminist journalism, and what impact do you think it has in mainstream media? Please go ahead. Thank you. So from Chile, we are watching very closely what is happening in Spain, specifically the general strike of women. We are far away geographically, but we saw the impact, which led to the creation of networks of journalists and feminists and gender perspective permeating journalism. And this is kind of the spearhead, which has really led us to question journalistic practices, specifically how content is developed and their ethical focus. And this all questions as well how these contents are produced. We launched a campaign called Non-Sexist Media, which in a way began questioning and criticizing, well, not criticizing, critiquing the media. And we saw the work of traditional newsrooms and non-traditional newsrooms. So very publicly, we felt a closeness to the demands of the feminist groups, not only in Chile, but also all over Latin America. But it's one step, two steps forward, one step back. What's important is to have a permanent transformation and not let it be just a trend that appears on the 8th of March or the 25th of November and then disappears, while the rest of the year these vindications of women, of feminist groups seem not to exist. I think that that is all part of this acknowledgement. Now, rather than acknowledging the impact of the feminist movement has allowed us journalists to recognize ourselves in feminism. And this lets new generations raise their voices and ourselves to express with these new professionals that can feel more comfortable in expressing empathy and expressing their closeness, everything that they feel as an approach to the feminist movement. There are 2 points that I find very important here, not just what we see in Chile, America, Latin America, or even Europe. I want to acknowledge feminist journalism, but this has opened up pathways and gaps, and it's put its foot in the door. I think that we can now dare to express our opinion, we dare to create a journalism that is also an opinion. Something that has been very encapsulated in the voices from the highest levels of power, from the top of the mountain, sort of an academic hierarchy that is also very patriarchal and very restrictive of who it comes from. And these journalists that are in the mainstream are finally daring to express their opinion. And they know that there are lots of us infiltrated in a different network, but we support them. And they look to us as well. But now, of course, looking at the online platforms, we're all over the place and there is no filter. So in addition to the gap and these trenches that we're opening up, I think Lola and everyone here has somehow seen and foreseen has to do with formative processes that not only come from academia, from our university studies. I think we have also promoted development from the organizations, from the grassroots. Something such as reading our contents, learning how to read the contents, accessing different spaces, questioning the information we consume. And of course, nowadays, with in the era of the pandemic, we need a more critical outlook. It's a formative process among peers, and that has been a contribution of feminist journalism. Fantastic, Monica. What you point out is truly interesting. Talking about empowering journalists, female journalists, for them to acknowledge themselves as feminist journalists, and also bring this to how they cover the information, how they produce the information. And we need to highlight how important this formative process is, and working from there, not only in the universities, but also bringing this recognition of constant development, no matter how many years we've been in the field, be it 3 weeks or 20 years. So that's also where we need consistency. We need to stay interested, and we have fantastic opportunities such as this one today. Now, Jessica, I would like to ask you, you mentioned the impact that you think that your outlet is creating. I would like to go more in depth of that. Do you think there are other outlets around that have started talking of women from this feminist perspective? Can you see any impacts from that? Well, right now in Brazil, we have some networks, as you do yourselves. We have different media vehicles such as Asmina, Amazonia Real, which are led by women. And in Brazil, we're in constant communication and discussing the role of women. We didn't always see ourselves as feminist journalists. This is because feminism hasn't been around in the periphery for long. Of course, there was a lot of struggle, but we never really understood we were feminists. This was a process, a beautiful, strong, important process, because we understand now that, yes, we are also feminists. But at this point in time, we have a participation with the organization Rosa Luxemburgo, which in Brazil has a role of discussing gender issues that also relate to Black women. The Black movement is taking a lot of strength right now, a lot of force, specifically with Black women. As a comment, I saw Guadalupe mentioning that in Mexico, we need to remember the past. And we do need that as well in Brazil. Women in the periphery need to talk about our present. We talk about it, but we always remember our past. We need to remember the movements of Black women. So our communication, production, and interviews always include our stories, but more of our ancestors, to understand our women, our Black women in the present. We need to understand ourselves as women who have had a long historical movement. We need to really undertake this idealistic transformation. There's a lot of racism in Brazil, not just now. We have always seen a lot of racism. It's only stronger now. Even through a pandemic, it has made it worse. We see ourselves as a network of journalists from the periphery. We also have a network of journalists that only work online. And it is important to have these variations to discuss also recurring funding. We are being attacked by our president all the time. So we need to survive and find ways to survive from funding from NGOs and different institutions and organizations. So getting together to work as a cluster is very important. And going back to one of your previous questions, yes, we do think that we had some progress in communication. Right now, we have Black women on public television, for example, and one of the members of our network is a news anchor on public television. I myself write for one of the mainstream media outlets, and it is very important because this means that we can bring our points of view to different audiences. So yes, there is some progress, but in Brazil, it's very small progress. We have structural racism also in communication.
Excelente, claro, creo que es importante señalar los contextos.
Great. It's very important to point out the context that we work out and the way that we're doing our journalism. So now, I'd like to pass the floor to Hazel, the Mexican here on the table. But well, I have a comment that has to do with some comments that we had in our chat, and that's before passing the floor to Hazel. But Jessica also talked about this, what we had before, the tradition that we have, all the media, the feminist media that we have with Mujeres Info, and all the work that we've done from, well, the El Periódico La Revuelta. Well, I cannot read them all, CIMAC, of course, but all of them. But there's a great tradition and work from feminist and gender perspective journalism. So, of course, we're talking now about this acknowledgement that it could have, like, going like this media that we have in Mexico, and now with this space in radio and this community radio from Hazel. Hazel, what can you tell us about the progress that you think we've had, and how has this had an impact?
Sin duda, Daniela, y como bien mencionan en los comentarios acá por Zoom que nos están recordando justo pues esta historia, ¿no? De los medios feministas que se han formado, sin duda es importante y es reconocer que, por ejemplo, ahora Violeta Radio como un nuevo medio es el resultado de todo eso, ¿no? Nosotras no podríamos existir sin el trabajo que han realizado todos estos medios que ya mencionas y que empecé a hablar de ello, ¿no? Al final del día, el reconocimiento del periodismo feminista es esto, los resultados son estos, que se siguen creando medios de comunicación feminista por todos lados. Ahora conocemos muchas pequeñas revistas, pequeños medios digitales, todos estos esfuerzos que se realizan y que se están realizando y que están creciendo al final del día es el resultado de este reconocimiento y esta larga labor que han hecho muchísimas periodistas para que, bueno, incluso estemos en este panel discutiendo y hablando de ello, ¿no? A mí, una de las experiencias que también quiero compartir, si bien nosotras nos ubicamos en la Ciudad de México,
we are in Mexico City, we're based in Mexico City, but something important to highlight is the work that journalists in other states are doing in their own communities, where of course the contexts are very different as well. They have different situations that are riskier because they're practicing journalism, and where they are facing more obstacles to face this type of journalism, feminist journalism. So the work we've done with partnerships with all of them has been very important as well, so that they can start coming and showing their job, and also so that they tell us what's happening in their communities. It's very important also to remind that the feminist agenda sees this context. Before,
teníamos o
we did
había
not
localidades,
have, or
estados
there were
donde
some
era
states and
impensable
communities
quizá
where it
una
was
marcha
impossible to
feminista,
think
¿no?
about
Y ahora
the
las estamos
feminist
viendo.
protest,
Y
and
hay
now we see them all
periodistas
the
quienes
time.
están
And there are
acompañando y
journalists that
quienes están
are coming
visibilizando, ¿no?
along and that they're
También
bringing
hemos
light to these.
intentado
We've also
descentralizar
tried
el trabajo que únicamente se
decentralizing
realiza en la
work
Ciudad de
that's done
México
in
y
Mexico
mostrar
City.
estos
And we're also
contextos que
showing
hay
all
a lo
these
largo del
contexts,
país, que
all these
son
contexts that we have
completamente
throughout the
distintos
country,
y
that
que
they're
son
very
necesarios
different
de
and that they're
visibilizar. En ese
necessary
sentido, el trabajo
and
de
that we
las
have to raise
periodistas en
awareness.
lo
And
local
the
ha
work of
sido y es
journalists
tremendamente importante
is very
y para
important,
nosotras ha sido muy importante
and well, it's been
incorporarlos
very
y
important to
tenerlas en
us to
Violeta
include
Radio.
it and to have
Estas
them in
agendas,
Violeta
esto que
Radio.
está
So
ocurriendo
all these
en
agendas, all
otros
these things that's
estados que no
going
son la
on in all
Ciudad de
these
México.
states, that's not Mexico
Parte de
City,
este
it's important to bring
reconocimiento
light to
también
that.
a
And
lo
also,
largo
all
del
this
foro, quienes han
acknowledgement,
tenido la oportunidad de escuchar otras
and for
mesas
the
y
ones
quienes no.
that
Bueno,
have
por
been
ejemplo,
able
teníamos
to listen to
esta
other
mesa de
tables that we've
editoras
had
de
in this
género
conference, well,
que
we
es
heard
muy
this
importante, ¿no?
round
Ellas
table
hablaban de la
of
experiencia que han
gender
tenido de
editors, and they
abrir
discussed
estas
the
áreas de
experience that they
género
have of opening
o
gender
igualdad,
divisions in
tienen
their
distintos
media or
nombres dentro
equality.
de
They
los
have
medios de
different names in
comunicación
their own
grandes,
media.
masivos, y los retos que han
And the
enfrentado ellas
challenges that
para
they face
incorporar la perspectiva
to
de género, el
include the
feminismo y
gender
mostrar
perspective,
que,
to include
como bien
feminism.
decía Lola, el
And just
periodismo
as Lola was
feminista
saying, that feminist
tiene un rigor,
journalism,
¿no?
it has to be
Tiene una
strict.
especialización,
It
¿no?
specializes.
Y
It
que
has to
se
be
tiene que
rigorous,
formar
and
y
we
que nos
have to
tenemos que
get
formar en
educated,
él.
and we have to
Eso
train
también
in
me
that.
parece un
That is
reconocimiento
also
importante, que
an
cada vez los
important
medios de
acknowledgement that
comunicación,
the
o por
mass
lo menos
media,
algunos,
or at
están
least
abriendo
some
espacios
media,
y
well,
que
they're
tenemos
opening
que luchar
spaces,
porque
and we
estos
have to
espacios no
fight so that
solamente
these
se traten
spaces are not
bueno, como
just
cubrimos el 8 de
about the way
marzo,
of covering
fechas
March the 8th or
que
these special
conocemos, el
dates
25,
that we
28 de
know,
septiembre,
March the
sino que sea
25th or
parte de la agenda
September,
cotidiana y que
but it
sea
has to be part of
transversal,
the
que
everyday
no
agenda,
somos
and it
una
has to be
pequeña, el
cross-cutting.
periodismo
We
feminista no es
are
una pequeña
not
sección, no,
a small
debe ser el
section.
titular, debe ser
It has to be
la nota
in the
principal,
headlines. It has to
debemos
be the
serla.
main note.
Entonces,
That's
eso
what
también creo que todavía
feminist
es un reto
journalism
que
has to be,
enfrentamos, ¿no?
and
Cómo
that's a challenge
colocarnos,
that we're
no
facing.
como fake news, no.
How not to
Eso me
be
parece otro
soft
reto
news
y
or these kind of
quizá
things. That is a
de
challenge
lo
as
que
well,
tenemos que avanzar en este
and we
reconocimiento del
have to make
periodismo
progress in this
feminista
recognition of
y
feminist
también otro reconocimiento me
journalism,
parece
and
importante
also
y
an
creo que
important
también es por lo
thing,
que estamos aquí, es
that
como las periodistas nos
I think
hemos
that
ido
we're here
organizando, ¿no?
for that,
Cada
and
vez
well,
en
we
más
journalists
redes,
are becoming
más
more
alianzas, se
organized,
van
more
integrando
partnerships,
otras y
more
eso me parece muy
networks. We're
importante
bringing
para
more
que
people to the
sigamos
table.
desde
So
donde
that's very
estemos, desde
important. So
sea un medio
that
feminista, no lo
whether
sea,
it's a feminist
podamos
media or it isn't, so that we
colocar
together,
cada
female
día
journalists,
más
can
en
bring
nuestras notas, en nuestro
more
trabajo
information
a las mujeres.
in our
Y me
work to
quedaría por
women.
ahí.
And well, that's where I would leave it now. Thanks very much, Hazel. And well, to conclude with this roundtable, we'll pass the floor now to Lenny so that she tells us, well, she spoke a little bit about this in her previous participation, but about the impact of the job that she's doing from the outskirts, like how these is linked to other media, and what's happening in your region now where you're doing this job. Yeah, absolutely. There is an acknowledgement, and not just now. I mean, not just La Pampa, but I'm talking about Argentina. And some 5 years ago, the number of feminist media has grown with some colleagues that are great. And yes, we also have networks of indigenous women, farmers. We are location that's in the center of the country, and we are in agriculture, and yeah, we're working here in our territory. And I see that you spoke about different women and different media as well. So yeah, well, we're short of time, but if I had to name all the people and all the organizations that I wouldn't have enough time, because I remember what I saw first, and then when I started falling in love with feminism. And then I was very young at that time. And I've been in this job for over 35 years, and I learned about journalism like 10 years ago. So we are the product of all that people that was before us. And honestly speaking, I won't be telling you that they have to acknowledge the previous one. I mean, that's where we started with feminism. And yeah, we have a horizontal construction. feminism is horizontal. And I also like saying that it's a huge political movement. And that's why we also work in masculinities. We start to give voice to our colleagues from all collectives, so as the LGBT, so that they also bring their conditions, their knowledge, and how these shifts of world paradigms. We have to see and change masculinities, to change this phrase that if a man wants to be a feminist, can we give them space? No. So when it comes to the colleagues from Mexico, I'm very thankful to them because Maroto has helped us with all this inclusive work that's non-sexist, and all these things have had an impact in the media, and that's what we are now. It's an acknowledgement to that, but also to that mass media. Why everything we do that we cover in our media has a cross-cutting conception. I know that older media, they also have great work of great colleagues. We're all in a network. And yeah, there are some networks that have a gender perspective, but it's a general context. Like 2 days later, that note or that work is lost. So that's why we have to keep working. So yeah, media and female journalists and feminist journalists were very strong when they ask for our advice, but yeah, there's a recognition to their work, but there's not an economic recognition for spaces, because well, they are pretending that we teach males from all the newsrooms so that they can say the things right, but we don't get a space at those spaces. So that is a thing we have to take into account. The acknowledgement is okay, but we're not getting those positions. Another thing that's important to say, it's an acknowledgement of society, and that is true, because when we go to social media, we don't see that. But yeah, there is a group of people somewhere in society, in social media, that they don't let you, they don't allow you to say these things that are machistic attitudes. That they're not allowing media to have this gender perspective, because that's important too. That is our success of our colleagues from the past, from now, and the ones that are coming. Well, I'm almost 60. So after me, a lot of bright journalists came that I also learned from them and I get information from. So yes, I think that there's a great acknowledgement. I mean, there is still a lot of work to be done. They have to still acknowledge that, like, we have to be, a lot of people do not like that we're female journalists. So yeah, it's better to that, well, and in Argentina, oh, well, like one of our colleagues said, is like that, like these quotes of gender have become trendy, but I wish that we can communicate all the team together and to give space to women, because yeah, because we have to learn to tell these stories, and we don't have to win those spaces. We have to use those spaces because they are our spaces. Great, Lenny. A great thing you're saying here. The impact, the acknowledgement of other media, the education of audiences as well. How these audiences are requesting and demanding, and they are empowered when it comes to their rights and their rights to information, and they demand other media to cover things properly. So there is an achievement, something that we've done successfully because of all the work we've done. But you also cover the topic that's very important. I want to wrap up with this block before moving to questions. And that has to do with money, with financing, how hard it is to be sustainable as an entrepreneur woman, a journalist, to say that it's an everyday thing. It is a problem. Sometimes the media can want to not to be there, but just like as if just to help, as if it was like a social benefit, social work. It's like, okay, give us a course. Okay, so this is my invoice. Look, you're gonna charge for that? It's like, really? Like, if we had to do that as a benefit for society. So I think that we have to talk about that. It has to be, we have to talk about financing and funds. And I would like to ask you in this last part, to all of you, what were your strategies? What have been your strategies of sustainability? How have you been able to work in this? And if they had some kind of impact, whether it was negative or positive with COVID. It's valid, absolutely, to wrap up with this. So I pass the floor to you. So we're 7 journalists, 7 communicators. Amal, Antonia, Laura, Lucia, Rocio, and Ruth, and Lola, myself. We're 7 women, and before we also had Ausi and Maria, but they left because of other reasons. But we're a media that we don't make a living from this. We live from other media, we work for other organizations, and we work for other companies. Yeah, so we finance ourselves through the premiums that people that want to collaborating to our media. And then we also train. We have these training courses and we charge for those courses. Because, yeah, if there's money for things, we also have money for education. And for feminist education, we even require that. So yeah, we charge for that. But we now have to shift gears and we don't know how we're going to do that. I mean, when it comes to financing. So the pandemic, well, what we've seen in the pandemic is that we're close with the people that you spend time to. We organize events and organizations, and now because of the pandemic, I mean, all that thing, like we see it now, it's complicated, it's difficult. Now we're just in the screens and tablets and computers, but we have to talk. We have to agree that with this information that's coming out from different unions or organizations or from other places. And now all this information that I have comes from the International Federation of Journalists, or the one that comes from the Union of Journalists from Andalusia, where the pandemic, I mean, this pandemic that has led to a crisis, not just a health crisis, but economic and social crisis as well. And then it again has an impact on women again. And yeah, we have to remember that in journalism before, women were the ones that had all these basic positions. We were in conditions that have always had a face of woman. We have all this. We had the crisis in 2018. It was a very serious thing where we lost our jobs. And if we did not lose our jobs, our salaries were reduced, our job conditions became very precarious. We tried to, well, the benefits that we got in 2018 and in all this pandemic, they haven't invested this money in their workers. And now with the pandemic, with COVID, we've seen that according to the International Federation of Journalists, more than half of women journalists have seen an inequality compared to their male colleagues. According to the poll, there's an increase in gender inequality, and they've been affected in the labor and private life. And it's a 62% according to this poll. And that has to do with their job responsibilities in 46%, and their salaries, there's a 27% impact. And also, we have discussed earlier the salary, it has a 28% less that women are charging. There's a gender gap compared to male. And then CERTES, or the reduction of temporary jobs, that's offered by women, and also women that are subsidized higher. And well, Daniela, you also spoke about conditions. The last question was about conditions, right? And yes, I wanted to add a comment here. The conditions that would have to be developed for our job, of course, we need to have public policies, because it's the freedom of information and freedom of expression as well. So as we said before, it's the basic rights that we people have, people that lives in all these countries. We have the authorities, and the state has to invest. The states have to invest in all these media, not just public media, that, well, of course, they are necessary, that we have them, but there's also a big investment in private media. And many of these media that we're talking about are private media, or they're from the third sector. We have to bet on that, because that bet is to giving voice to people, to fulfill those rights. Because in democratic states and of right, they are supported in the freedom of information. It is a right, it is a basic. In all states that call themselves democratic, it's a basic. And when it comes to unions, we also have to take into account that women, well, there's another gap there. We have to go out there. In the media are companies, they're companies. The media, they're company that they sell information. In the committees of companies, in the committees, that's the one, they are the ones that agree these collective agreements. That's when we negotiate all these protocols of harassment, we negotiate contracts, everything. I mean, all stories that affect us at our job and professional job. So women have to be in those places where they're taking those decisions, in those business tables. We have to be there. And the United Nations says that women in conflict areas, the need of women being in these negotiating tables, women have to be there, like Colombia, for example. Yes, in those negotiating tables, when the war is over and we have to rebuild the country, women have to be there. So if we are in a war, we are in the war of precariousness. We're in the war of invisibility. We are in the war of multiple violences against women. And in those negotiation tables, we have to be in the union organizations, and we have to be in our own companies negotiating what's law, what's a standard in our guild.
Es hacernos visibles en estos espacios de toma de decisiones.
How important is it to have visibility in these spaces? It's not just about opening up the gap. There need to be a lot of conditions to allow us to do it, but we also need to reflect on how to participate in this space. Now, Monica, there was something very important I wanted to elaborate on. Now, we have a comment saying that gender perspective in journalism in Mexico is kept up thanks to women because the economy does not allow for it. Monica, what can you tell us about this? Right, I want to pick up the comments that Carolina is making on the chat, and I'll try to summarize my answer. Considering 30 years of political theory in Chile. Now, the pandemic crisis found Chile in the middle of a very deep democratic crisis that is right now visualized with social disturbance starting from 2019. Now, this has been reflected, I wouldn't say because of a lack of openness and democracy, but our system not only has censorship, but this has an implication on any democratic society. Any democratic society has access to information and to communication, not only as a basic right of communicators and journalists, but also as a general society. So we have a democratic debt, let's say, in general, which is huge, because what I can convey to you is that the issue of the right to information, freedom of speech, right to communication is not an issue for the journalists here. They're not worried about it. So it's not a matter of concern. And the media, seeing this democratic crisis, have their own crisis that they've been dragging along for a while. Now, I would even dare to say that this is something not only from Latin America, but it's worldwide, where we have competition among the media and from the media. And this weakens any type of participation in this labor market that women have to go into. So community outlets are even persecuted, as Lola said. We've seen this. And mostly with the political and social uproars that started in 2019 and the uprisings. So as Carolina says, there is no chance to sustain any outlets, not even the feminist ones, or even any type of journalistic initiatives from feminism. But what sustains this practice and how we see the profession is being sustained by networks of feminists that are discussing and making visualize at a different scale what we see in terms of this crisis and from their perspective. So in terms of what we've seen from international cooperation agencies, I wonder, what are these major entities looking at considering their understanding of a democracy? So, looking at international policies and politics after the dictatorship, Chile is considered even a mini powerhouse in Latin America. But still, to strengthen democracy, we needed to remove this administration, and it has left the reflection on democracy very stagnant with a lack of resources. Now, there are other parties involved in the restructuring of democracy who are not really reflecting on what happens with the media, with all of them, right? Those working at community levels territorially, or those are even identified as the most progressive ones. It goes beyond the legacy media, but they're not giving any value to them. And it also has to do with a discussion on democracy. Now, um, this leaves on the sides everyone going out to work on a certain activism. And the ones who do dare to do so are feminist journalists that are trying to bring to the light these types of debates. And this is what we discussed even at the start of this panel. Now, that's excellent. All these contributions give us a very Latin American outlook of the circumstances, but there is a very similar common thread. Now, we have a comment coming over our social media. I'll read it out for Jessica to comment. Now, the attack to the rights of female journalists and lack of participation at an equal level in the media affects women's right to communication, but I've seen a growing number of feminist outlets. We see a lot of proposals, but what is their situation? So again, what are the sustainability strategies to help these outlets survive, and have they been affected by the pandemic? Jessica, if you please. Now, Daniela, that is really complicated to answer because we've only been around for a couple of years, and it has been in this last year that we've been able to perceive some sort of institutional wage, any type of money. Before the pandemic, we had different jobs, so I really didn't need to make money out of this in order to sustain our outlet. But since the pandemic started, myself and three other female journalists have been out of work because of the pandemic and additional processes. And we had to put all our efforts and all our strength into our entrepreneurship. So, firstly, it is very complicated to see ourselves as entrepreneurs because this space has never before been ours. Never before have Black women in Brazil been in a position of leadership. So this has to do with putting in all your energy and feeling ourselves as entrepreneurs, as leaders in communication. That's one. Two is how complicated it is because funding for communications is non-existent in Brazil as a public form of funding. Not even and much less for community, progressive, or popular outlets. However, the government and other organizations have looked to advertising. Now, that goes evenly distributed to the mainstream media. Now, I don't want to have any advertising from the government. No way, because of Bolsonaro. That's a major issue. Third, very frequently, other women and other media outlets that are not for women or by women, or even less for Black women and women in the periphery, they don't really know how to get to foundations that provide funding. Now, we are not even in the scope of view of these people. We've been talking in the last year with foundations. We've been holding a lot of conversations and presenting our media outlet. And we've been telling everybody, we need money, we need funds for different projects. For the time being, during the pandemic, the existence of communication by Black women and for them is very important, because we're talking about our reality in our territories. Right now in Brazil, the worst of the pandemic is being experienced in the periphery. There is one person at least dying in our streets, in our neighborhoods. So we're very close to these women. Now, over the last year, over 2020, the first thing, it was the first time that we received structural monies. And right now we have 3 women working for us, and we have another 7 women working for this. So at this time, we have only been a funded media outlet for a year. So right now, I'm holding a lot of meetings, lots of um, applications for grants and the like, because we don't have a single source of income. We need to get our funds by working, by reporting, by talking to foundations, by writing for other organizations. And we have very little advertising. Nonetheless, it's always connected to our values. Another thing we're doing right now is we're structuring a campaign for recurring financing. In Brazil right now, all the progressive and feminist and periphery outlets are discussing different forms and formats for funding. It's very complicated. We don't have any sort of law or decree, and we have to do things for ourselves. So we have ourselves only to rely on. So we help each other out in our network. For the time being, this campaign for recurring funding is going to work as subscriptions, and it's going to cost 10 reais, which is our currency, and we need to help each other out, basically. We're hoping that this will also keep us afloat. Now, it's taken us a very long time to get one type of financing. Funding from international foundations and institutes are a lot more prevalent than national ones, but Bolsonaro is insane. So at any given time, he can block everything, and it makes things complicated for us. Right, I think many of these journalist incentives are supported by grants and by funding from international organizations, because we don't really have that access nationally, and we have political influence, so we need to look for alternative means for funding. Jessica, thank you. So I'll ask the same question next on how these strategies work and what are they, and perhaps you could tell us what you still need to continue doing this in this context that we're experiencing.
Gracias, Daniela. Creo
Thank
que
you, Daniela.
coincidimos todas en
I
los
think
problemas
we
que
all agree
enfrentamos en este
in
tema del
terms of
financiamiento.
the problems we're
En nuestra
experiencing
experiencia
in getting
ha
funding.
sido también a partir de los fondos
In our
que hemos
experience, we've
encontrado
been
por parte
able
de
to work
organizaciones
for funding that
internacionales que
comes
han
from international
acompañado nuestro trabajo y
organizations,
lo reconocen.
and
Eh,
they believe in our work
Pero
and they
sin duda
recognize its
también
importance.
hay algunos
Undoubtedly,
obstáculos, ¿no? La
there
mayoría de
are
los fondos
obstacles that we have to
o
overcome,
no hay tantos fondos
such
tampoco
as there aren't
para
that many
que
funds
sigan
really
nuestra
to
agenda, ¿no? La agenda del
keep our
movimiento
agenda going, the
feminista,
agenda of the
temas
feminist movement, or
específicamente
even
sobre derechos
to keep
humanos de
working
las
on
mujeres,
topics
y en esos
specifically
también
related to
pues
the
llega
human
a ser un
rights of
reto,
women.
¿no?
So that becomes an additional
También nos
challenge.
hemos ayudado de otros
We have also
proyectos, de
helped
las
each other
propias
from
capacitaciones.
different
En
projects,
nuestro
from
caso,
training,
yo
and
pertenezco a
in
CIMAC,
our
entonces,
case,
bueno, aquí somos dos compañeras, María y yo
Violeta,
somos quienes
two
nos
of us, Maria and
encargamos
myself, are members
de
of
esta
CIMAC,
parte de
so
CIMAC
we are
dentro
the
del
ones
proyecto de
in
Violeta Radio.
charge
Entonces, bueno,
of the
también
Violeta
somos
Radio
pocas manos y
project. So
tratamos
we have
desde
very
las
few
áreas en las
hands,
que
and
podemos
we're
sacar adelante estos
making every
proyectos y
attempt
todo
from
lo que
the
implica
areas
eso.
where we can bring
Entonces,
these
por
projects
ejemplo, un
forward.
ejemplo de lo que hemos logrado con
An
estos
example of what
financiamientos
we've
fue durante la
achieved with
pandemia, que eso
these
fue muy
financing,
importante. Era
specifically during
necesario
the
visibilizar
pandemic,
cuáles eran las
it was very important
condiciones y
to
la manera diferenciada en la que
visualize
está
the conditions, how
impactando esta
different it
pandemia
was,
en las mujeres, ¿no? Recibimos
how
algunos
differently it was
fondos,
going to
un
affect
fondo de
us.
ayuda rápida, y
So
eso
we
nos permitió
received a
generar
quick
campañas para
aid
informar, que al final del día
funding,
eso también es muy
and
importante
it
a
helped us
través de la
generate
radio,
campaigns as
informar
well, which
sobre
imply how important
desde
it
números
is
de
to
seguridad
communicate
para
over the
víctimas de
radio.
violencia,
We
desde
started
también para mujeres
broadcasting
embarazadas, donde
telephone
acudir o
numbers for
buscar servicios
assistance
de
for women who
atención,
are victims of
medidas,
violence,
también
pregnant women
llamar
who need
a la
health
división
care,
de las tareas de
so
cuidado.
emergency services.
Todo esto también nos ayudó a estos fondos,
All
bueno,
of
a seguir
this has
realizando
also
nuestro
helped us
trabajo,
get
y
the
también
funds that
una apuesta
support
muy
our
grande
work,
que
and
tenemos
we have
en CIMAC y
a big
que hemos
bet
llevado
going,
también nosotras a
which
Violeta Radio,
is
pues
that
es
we have
también
taken
cómo
Violeta
colaborar,
Radio
incorporar otras
into
compañeras
a
periodistas de los estados
collaboration
que
with
logren tener
other
un trabajo
feminist journalists
remunerado.
from
Hemos
around the
buscando
country
también fondos para
whose
ellas
work
para
has
que
been
puedan tener
affected,
un
and we're
pago por el
looking
trabajo
for
que
funds
realizan.
for them to
Muchos lo
receive a
realizan de
wage
forma
for their
solidaria
work.
también, porque
Many of
también
them
existe
are
eso,
part of
¿no?
the
Quienes
network, and we also, again,
se
have the
comprometen con
networks
el medio, se
that are
comprometen con estos
committed to
espacios
the
y de
outlet,
forma
that are
solidaria
committed to these
nos apoyan
spaces,
con la
and
información,
they
pero
really
bueno,
support
también
us
nosotras hemos
solidarily
echado la mano de estos
with
fondos para que
information,
ellas puedan
and
tener un
it
trabajo
is
remunerado, que
reciprocal.
es lo que
We also
buscamos,
help
justo
them have a
salir de estas
wage,
condiciones de precariedad
and
laboral,
we
¿no? Y
can
que se debe
all
reconocer y que
support
es
each
todo un
other
tema.
and have some sort of
Eh,
stability in these
y tu
uncertain
otra
times.
pregunta,
And
Daniela,
your
quizá
other
era
question, Daniela, I think
buscar estrategias,
was
¿no?
finding
¿Qué,
strategies,
qué
right?
podemos realizar en ese ámbito? Y sin duda
What
también
can
creo
we
que
do?
en este caso de radios
So I
comunitarias,
think for
como es
community
Violeta Radio,
radio,
pues
such
también
as
ya lo
Violeta,
comentaba Jessica y
we
lo
go back
comentaba por ahí
to
Lola,
what
¿no?
Jessica
La
and Lola
responsabilidad que
mentioned.
existe del
There
Estado
is a
también de empujar
responsibility
estos
on behalf
espacios,
of
¿no?
the state to
Sobre todo de
promote
medios como
these
Violeta
spaces.
Radio, que es un espacio feminista, ¿no? Y que
We have a
tenemos
feminist
y
space
que al
here
final
that
del
is
día nuestro
open,
servicio es eso,
and at the end of the
para
day,
la gente,
that
para
is
que
the
llegue la
service that we
información
provide.
a ellos y
We
a
are trying
ellas.
to inform the
Y sin
people,
duda creo que
both
también ahí
men
hay
and
una
women.
responsabilidad, y
And I think that
también
there's
me
also
parece
a
interesante que con
responsibility
todas estas
involved there. And I
reflexiones
find it very
que hemos tenido
interesting
podamos
that
pensar
over
también en
these
modelos
reflections,
sustentables
we
para
can think of sustainable models
espacios, nuestros
for our
medios,
spaces, for our
y quizá
outlets.
escuchar las
And
experiencias de
maybe
otros
we
para
can
también
listen
formar
to other
otros medios
people's
y ver la manera en
experiences
la que
to form
podamos
new
seguir
outlets and
realizando
find ways to
nuestra labor.
continue doing our job.
Excelente.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Hazel. So now, to finish, we're going to go to Lenny with regards to sustainability, strategies, and if you've been affected by the pandemic. But I'm pretty sure that there are specific conditions we all need to continue working in feminist journalism.
So, well, I just wanted to say that at first, when we created our media, when we would send uh, someone to publish it, we added a note at the end where we said that, well, we sent a link to the platform of Beijing. We also included paragraph 24510 that they have to support the development of new media and the use all the different means of communication and to provide financing as necessary to include information for women and their interests. Yeah, and I just I wanted to mention this. And also, we have private advertising. Then from 2015 to 2019 in Argentina, the private advertisers withdrew. And at that time, we were just three. It was Sofia. She was a student of communication, and Sandro that has already majored and he has specialized in gender perspective, and some other people that were collaborating, colleagues of the International Network of Journalists. And I also had to have this religious concept that have helped women and that they have to do it. I cannot be creating feminist media. And so we've had we've been lucky. And as of 2019, we have a government that is betting on gender perspective, and we have good legislation, and we also have these laws. The law Micaela that comes from the femicide of a girl called Micaela. And in Argentina, the gender perspective if training is mandatory for state agents. So well, it's more in speech than in action, and you of course understand this. But there's another look, and there's another way. And 2 years ago, mainly with the government of La Pampa, and mainly because the state, we never went to international organizations, and well, you know that it's very complex to do so, that we have to comply and fulfill with many requirements, and then well, they don't pay all the work, so that is also a thing that we have to learn. We have to learn about science and economy and accounting, and we don't have time for that. So yeah, all these things are difficult for us. And another thing that I am always discussing all the time is that we have to work with states. So we have to work and we have to think in a way that we can have the gender perspective and feminist outlook. And it is also true that we are all activists besides being feminists. So in the pandemic, we have gone out to help because we are seeing these huge inequalities, the feminization of poverty, our trans colleagues on the streets, the lack of right of working from home. And yeah, we have to bring the light to all this self-care. We've have to go out to gather food for colleagues that are on their own. So we do have public policies, but we are emphasizing self-care policies, and we're also trying to stop walking that path of inequality in the salary. So we're not achieving this. This is helping. This is, but we do need, first of all, to be acknowledged as women, as persons, because sometimes it's even hard for the states to acknowledge us. Then that we are women with rights, because it seems that human rights are not for women. And third, we have a law of communication, a communication law, so that it can rule not just audiovisual media like we have it now in Argentina, but also all these internets. And these could help us and support us to bring our job as journalists to a different position, as us as a female journalist and feminist journalist. And yes, we have to work and write and to go help someone that's out there with 3 guys being attacked, and we have to go with someone or to accompany a trans colleague because she does not have an agreement. So now with the pandemic, they're not being covered. So also as feminist journalists, we have to sign up. I don't know how you call that, but we get an invoice for the job we do. So we invoice our work, and we do not get any help from the state. We used to have some subsidies in the past, some help. We had many different things that feminist journalists, we have to get an invoice for a job, but we're not getting any help for our work in the pandemic. And well, also the territory is great. And as Jessica was saying, we are the speakers of a lot of people that were not looking at us, and we wanted to tell some reality, whether it was for curiosity or rating or whatever, but we were never the voice except for a personal interest. So it is hard. What do we need? That the voices of women are important, that the women of our trans colleagues are also heard, and they're important voice, that we don't have differences. I cannot speak as a trans colleague because, or from a Black woman because I'm not Black or I'm not a trans woman. So be able to give voice to all these voices of colleagues. I cannot talk from a woman that's different to me in a different situation, in a smaller situation. So I cannot do that because I'm not her. So that's what we need. That's what we need to move on, to value our voices and not to be just waiting for the voice of a holy cow or all of us follow that. We are all important. We are all in the feminist. You and I, we are all the feminists. That's what we need to give us our own position, and well, keep working together. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Lenny, and thanks for this incredible wrap up. I think that is a reflection that we have to take with us. We are feminism, and that is an important thing. The importance of voicing all our ideas. And I have some very important ideas that we've handled from different latitudes from Latin America. The importance of giving this voice to other women, to other persons, so that they speak about their reality, so that they speak about what affects them. Women, trans women, Black women, indigenous women. That is all the diversity that we are as women, of how the work that we're doing from our media with a gender perspective media has an impact, not just in the massive media, but it also has an impact in the audiences, these audiences that are being educated, that are requesting and asking to the social media to cover things in one way or another. And I think that this is part that we can definitely connect as, well, this is what we are harvesting for what we've grown for a long time already. And to understand that the work we're doing is self-managed, is financed by ourselves with our own resources, and also the demand that Lola and Monica and Lenny were saying, that it's also the state that has to be part of it. This reminder that, well, to Lenny, it seems to be very innocent, that all these comes from the needs and from the agreements and what's been signed. but it seems to be very innocent, and it is a reality that we have to assume, and we have to start demanding their agreements. We have to remind them their commitments, both for their necessary reforms, just as the telecom laws that, well, we've had some changes in some legislation in Mexico and Argentina, but they never talk about gender. They talk about all these concessions, but they never talk about gender. So we have to be having some incidents there. So yeah, we're including all the questions and comments from the people that were reading us and listening to these. So because I think it's very important, it's great to know and to include these in this dialogue. So yeah, we're very glad we heard all the voices of all of you who asked questions and shared questions, because that was a goal of having this dialogue. And well, I just have to thank you for this opportunity of having this opportunity, and to also have the chance of being in this last panel that that it was the one that we had for wrapping up the work that we've had these 2 days, all these activities that we've had in this conference, that we've had a lot of people from very valuable people participating in these, working on these urgent actions for the future 25 of the Beijing platform. And well, now, again, I want to thank you. But again, I also like to pass the floor to my colleagues of the Investigation Commission, Grace Torrente and Rocio Islas Huerta, so that they read the Decalogue of Rights for Women in Communication and Journalism. So hi everyone, I'm Rocia Isla. So it's great to see you everyone from Mexico City, and it's been to me a great experience, a very fulfilling experience to work with the Commission of Investigation, with my colleagues from the different countries, Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, because, well, what you're now saying here goes beyond the work we've done. It's work, horizontal work, a company where the experience and the work and the commitment for feminist journalists is reflected here. So trust me, this has been a great honor to work with all of you. It's been a wonderful experience. And well, we don't have a lot of time, so I'd like to start by thanking my colleagues by their names, and well, also that to say that these are the networks that we have, the work that we're doing, with a commitment with these women that are fully committed, and this leadership that we have to work and to make these decalogue possible. So we're gonna, I'm in charge of coordinating this international network of journalists, and Jay Torrete from Colombia. So the two of us are coordinating these, and we're gonna read the decalogue that we created. So it was created with a summary and with the analysis of the colleagues that delivered all their documentation on Chapter J. So how they saw and how they view the reality of their countries and the follow-up that they had to Chapter J. So, well, the Decalogue will be posted on the webpage, but I'm gonna read some of the ideas and the summary that we did together. So I see Grace here. We are ready now. So having said that, I'm gonna start reading. So it says, recommendations for advancing gender equality and women's rights in communication and journalism. Chapter J, Women and the Media, Beijing Platform for Action. Summary of the recommendations made by the networks of journalists with a gender perspective from Argentina, Brazil, Catalonia, Chile, Colombia, and Mexico. done by the research committee of the Committee of Investigation. That's Alicia Oliver Rojo, Cristina Pulido, Cintia Mara, Mónica Maureria, Grace Monterrat, and Rocío Islas. So recommendations for advancing gender equality and women's rights in communication and journalism. So we did different divisions. Give me just a second, I'm sorry. Yeah, and well, okay, so we divided it in 6 areas. The first one is regulations and public policies aimed at governments, media, and technology companies. Then the states and governments should promote the application of Chapter J of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action in the Media through laws, public policies, and programs, assigning the budgetary allocation. And this is very important. That's what you were discussing earlier on the economy. To make sure that the mass media acts in accordance with current international standard on women's rights and incorporate existing recommendations on the treatment of women and gender-based violence in the media. Also to develop and strengthen measures to sanction the media that promotes gender stereotypes and violence in any of its expressions, including symbolic and those that occur in the second level, both in analog and digital environments. Also, to agree with the state, media, and technology companies and the main vendors of digital platforms, a coordination system, a cooperation and co-regulation to eliminate potential harmful references on the internet that promote violence against women and other historically and socially excluded populations. Then to finish with this first section, to guarantee the implementation of training processes on gender-based violence and women's rights aim at the media, digital content providers, and state entities, health, justice, and protection, so that they include the gender perspective interactions, routes, and protocols for prevention, response, alert, and sanction of this violence. These processes should be coordinated. And finally, in this section, also to promote human rights and gender equality in all mass media or technology companies, and the communication, safeguarding freedom of expression and users. And also to build a safe space and free of violence. Now, number 2 will be read by Jay Torrente, that she's here. Yeah, my microphone was not connected. Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for this space. So I'm going to start reading. Okay, so violence against journalists, it's not just in analog, but also digital environments. So the recommendations are to guarantee spaces free of violence and sexual harassment on and off the internet against women journalists due to gender or sexual orientation. This should be done through zero tolerance policies against any manifestation of violence by colleagues, bosses, and sources. One big question, if you could speak a little slower so that interpreters can follow your interpretation. Let's remember that we are with an English version on YouTube. Sorry for the interruption, but if you could read a little slow, please, so that the translation's better. Sure. So you want me to repeat it yeah, if you could do that, that would be great, please. Okay, so the first recommendation is to guarantee spaces free of violence and sexual harassment on and off the internet against women journalists due to gender or sexual orientation. And well, the goal is that we do this with zero tolerance policies against any manifestation of violence by colleagues, bosses, and sources. Also, it is important to develop and implement equality policies or plans protocols and routes for prevention and detection of gender violence to prevent and also for detecting gender violence and sexual harassment inside the mass media. And also, it is important that these mechanisms of protection are clear, as well as the restoration of the rights of women journalists in their mass media companies. Yeah, and we have to remember that this has to be done both in analog and in digital. Now, there are two very important points here that have to do with the generation of these protocols and routes, and that is that we have to include women journalists in the elaboration, in the review of all these protocols, because we have to listen to their experience. We have to identify the reasons why they're not filing complaints and the burdens or barriers of access that they have. This will help that these policies are better. And also, to guarantee the independence and confidentiality in the process of claiming attention and protection. Another recommendation is that we stimulate networks of solidarity among peers so that the reporting of violence and sexual harassment is not considered a matter that concerns only women. And well, we've said this in many different ways. This is not a thing of just women or women journalists. This is something that is a matter of society as a whole. And then I would stop there and I would pass the floor to my colleague in the coming chapter.
Uso del lenguaje no sexista y discriminatorio.
This is a section that I really appreciate. It's the use of inclusive language in all journalistic contexts to represent women in all their diversity and have an equal representation in all aspects. Make all people visual and represent gender and sexual diversity. To eliminate differentiated treatment between the genders. Avoid the male terminology to universalize language because it makes women invisible. We need to use more neutral terms or collective names. Also, alternate the use of grammatical genders throughout the text and avoid always starting with the male. Eradicate expressions of degradation of women to build true equal treatment. Avoid expressions related to the body, gestures, and other types of nonverbal language through which the most discriminatory senses might be reinforced, including those of sexism, and include a sense of correlation that starts a non-sexist media. Next to Grace. Then, on the representation of women and the treatment of information, I think this panel covered many of the recommendations. The first one is to promote a balanced, wide, plural, diversity, and autonomous representation of women in the media, meaning that all content and formats of information should show a dignified representation of women both off and online. To consult sources of information from women as well. There are a lot of women who are familiar with the topics of general interest in our countries who are expert on topics of gender and women's rights, and this will balance the voices on the news, on information analyses and journalistic contents. With regard to the entire topic and treatment of information related to violence, it is important to generate strategies to avoid publishing content, news, and discourse that is fake on social media and digital platforms. By this, we refer to fake news, which are presented as truth and delegitimize violence against women online. It's essential to have public alert systems of this type of symbolic violence. To represent and present women who have survived any form of gender-related violence as citizens with rights, with the capacity to act without blaming them of the actions and violence against them. This includes an information of the mechanism, instances, and channels for denouncing violence in different countries. These countries have social media and numbers to turn to, and they are constantly available to the public. Additionally, we need to make announcements and present pathways to establish the rights of the victims. This helps generate and strengthen the culture of denouncing. Additionally, we need to have journalistic lines of investigation on this type of violence so that we can also help eradicate a culture of impunity. And finally, to create and strengthen in the media a specialized unit to defend women and the capacity to get responses to any claims or complaints on sexist conduct, which make women's rights vulnerable as well as human rights, because we also have the right LGBT plus and non-binary populations to have a gender perspective. Oh, I'm next, right, Lucia? Yes, we have labor rights. So I will conclude with two important points on labor rights, which was also covered. The recommendation is to guarantee diverse and equal participation of women and non-binary people inside companies of the media and communications field, as well as online platforms. This means there needs to be access to decision-making, executive roles, and the newsrooms to break the glass ceiling that stops the rise of women to positions of leadership. This is strongly related to eradicating the wage gap based on gender for similar roles performed by men. This is one of the most serious aspects that make the jobs of women more dangerous and more unstable. That is the end of this section. And we also need to assess working conditions of women and take action towards proper conditions. The final point is gender perspective programs in oral educational institutions, which leads to the information of theory and knowledge of the theory in terms of gender perspective. Organize alliances between educational institutions and alliances to provide complementary information on gender aspects of women's rights for journalism professionals. Yeah, to establish a agreement for the specialization and creation of professionals in the fields of journalism, communication, and related professions to change attitudes towards violence against women that does not justify or ignore violence against women, that eliminates stereotypes and promotes decision-making among both genders. This is aimed at the press, television, radio broadcasters, news agencies, and advertising. Another topic is to include these in journalism, communication, and advertising curricula, so non-elective subjects to take on gender perspective and the rights of women from a differential aspect, including social, racial, and gender perspectives, to promote transversality as well in other subjects, to develop spaces for literacy online and offline, including contexts directed at the critical reading of the media, both analog and digital, over the different stages of our educational formation, our practice, and professional career, with the purpose of extending the understanding of communication as a human right and analyzing the representation of women in the media. Finally, to promote the creation of observatories of the media promoted among alliances with civil society and universities, with other organizations, to create gender perspective in the media. This is to promote women's rights in communication as well as journalism. It is dynamic, it is a live document that will be adjusted according to the conditions and progress in the different areas of communication and journalism, as well as in the countries where we have networks of journalists with gender perspective. I want to thank our colleagues, Monica, Jessica, Grace, and Christina, as well as all our other colleagues from all our different countries in Mexico, in Latin America, and in Spain. Grace, do you have any other comments? Thank you very much for the invitation and for opening this space. I will add the links to the reports from the different networks of journalists with gender perspective. If anyone wants to check the links and the information, thank you very much. This space is of great importance. Thank you very much for the forum. Thank you for making our work known, which belongs to all our colleagues and our networks. Thank you. Rocio and Grace, thank you so much for sharing your decalogue with us. It is great of you to share the information with us. And I just have the obligation now to close this panel of feminist outlets, thanking the participation of all our panelists, Hazel, Monica, Lenny, Jessica, and Lola, who were kind enough to join us this afternoon. It was a very interesting discussion. And finally, to finally conclude these 2 days of our international forum, where we were able to analyze all the pending and urgent actions for the future on the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action, I would like to close by giving the floor to our colleague, Lucia, who will now read our pronouncement, and then we will officially close this forum. Thank you. Thank you, Daniela. On the 25th anniversary of the Declaration of the Beijing Platform for Action, academicists, defenders, feminists, journalists, and communicators have met virtually on the 25th and 26th of March 2021 to assess the progress and pending matters of Chapter J, Women in the Media. After 2 days of dialogue, we have identified urgent actions for the future. We acknowledge the important labor that has been performed by women in and outside the media, and that the incorporation of a feminist outlook in the media has favored the open spaces for women towards innovative focuses on information, the creation of new media outlets and initiatives such as gender editors as a way to make it more democratic and to transform journalism according to the new realities where women are at the forefront of history. That female journalists are victims of gender-based violence when practicing their profession, as well as the unproportionate impact of certain types of discrimination in their line of work. This is a job performed under conditions of risk with constant threats inside and outside the newsrooms. On the inside, there are prevailing unequal conditions, a wage gap, and violence such as harassment and sexual harassment. In the field, violence intends to silence critical voices where public officials are the main aggressors. Be it directly or virtual, these are actions and omissions that seek to annul or undermine the free expression, the spread of opinions by our female journalists, and access to information. Violence becomes worse in contexts where state leaders criminalize journalism, where they do not know the risk, in particular, of female journalists, and head campaigns against them and to try to silence. To this, we add justice systems that re-victimize and lead to impunity. The inequality faced by women in the media are sharpened by a pandemic which has meant more instability and more obstacles in their job, because these actions did not consider concrete actions for over half the population. We declare that freedom of expression is a source of power for women. We acknowledge ourselves as defenders of the human rights of women. Together, we are stronger. Therefore, we call on journalists, communicators, media outlets, organizations that defend human rights and that are members of our civil society to join the following post-Beijing agenda. We reaffirm the purposes of Chapter J from the Platform of Action, Women and the Media. 1. To increase access by women and their participation in expressing ideas and adopting decisions in the media. To foster a balanced image of non-stereotyped women in the media and eradication of violence against female journalists and communicators. For this, we need from the state to strengthen their criminal systems in favor of gender justice when it comes to violence against women journalists, including online violence, and to meet the recommendations of international organisms in terms of freedom of expression and protection, to create legal frameworks to protect opinions that promote dialogue and that differ from governments, as well as to eradicate misogynistic, stereotype, discriminatory discourse hiding behind the right of freedom of speech. To create policies to eliminate contents that foster gender violence as a demand and not as an alternative, avoided with financial sanctions of international organizations, to promote mechanisms for funding feminist journalism, to observe compliance with the recommendations issued on violence against journalists, strengthen networks of female journalists, and foster the exchange of experiences between organizations, the academia, media, and civil organizations linked to freedom of expression and gender of the media, to promote leadership of women in media and reinforce their presence in editorial teams, to distribute in an equal way all tasks and roles within the newsroom, to promote measures that allow for the development of the women at a professional level that facilitate healthcare systems and their personal life, as well as to make available feeding areas and daycare centers, to guarantee dignified wage conditions and equal labor rights, as well as spaces that are free of violence against women, and to back their